Hi there, and welcome to this next episode of the Footlight Broadcast. My name is Brian O'Kelly, broadcasting from the forest in Cottage Lake, Washington, just outside of Seattle. And this is episode 3 of the Footlight Broadcast. And this is entitled, I guess, for lack of a better way to title it, What is the Historical Archaeological Evidence for the Bible, and Can We Trust the Bible? This is kind of part 2 in a series of Is the Bible Trustworthy? And so let's get right into it. What is the objective evidence from history to support the Bible? And if you saw the first episode, The Grounds of Knowledge, we talked about the difference between objective and subjective truth. And objective truth is truth that is outside of you, outside of your matter of opinions. It is truth that is based on evidence that can be measured by anyone. And so, what is the objective reality about the histories given in the Bible and the facts given in the Bible? And can the Bible be proved wrong on any historical fact? Well, there's an important thing that is a concept here, and that is that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And if you go looking for things that are, written by atheists and so on, trying to discredit the Bible, and you're looking for the fact that they can point to that demonstrates that the Bible isn't trustworthy, you're going to find that they don't have any. There are many claims that are made that, well, because we can't find this or that, it probably didn't exist. And we're going to go through a number of those in this broadcast, showing you that the opinion had to change when they finally discovered it. So there is currently no evidence that would contradict anything in the Bible in the archaeological record. There are a lot of things that would confirm things that are in the Bible, and we're going to go through not all of those because it's a very long list. It would make for a very long episode, but we're going to go through some of them that I think are important. So let's jump right into it. The first one, and I'll talk about a complaint that is often lodged. The Israelites came in and possessed the land after the Exodus. Joshua led them into the land of Canaan, and there's a claim that the Canaanites were destroyed in the process of that, and that the Canaanites ceased to exist. And so people want to say, the atheists want to say, well, we've found people that today have shared DNA with what we know are the remains of ancient Canaanites. Therefore, the Bible is not accurate. Well, let's just address that one right up front. When it says that the Canaanites were destroyed, it doesn't mean that everyone who had ever married or intermarried with a Canaanite person was destroyed. What it means is that their society and the land, they were dispossessed of their land and destroyed as a society or a nation, if you will. But of course, like every society, there were people who intermarried outside of that society. There were Canaanite women and men who had left their main tribe or society there and had become part of other tribes outside of that. And so this is just common sense that we would still find people who are descendants of those people on the scene today. So that just addresses the one main thing. The second main thing people talk about is that there's no evidence for the Exodus. And we're going to go through that in some detail today and demonstrate that there is. So the first thing that I want to talk about is Noah's flood. Well, is there proof for a global flood occurring? There is not. Let me just be right up front about that. There's no archaeological proof or science that proves that there is a global flood. What there are, however, though, is proof that the entire Western Hemisphere, that's North America and South America, were indeed underwater at one point. There are excavations in modern-day Iraq that have revealed evidence of severe flooding around 2900 BC. Regions of Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf are believed to have experienced large areas of changes of sea level, submerging lots of the land because of rapidly rising waters. There's a thing called the Black Sea deluge hypothesis that provides that a catastrophic tsunami raged across the Mediterranean Sea into the Black Sea, flooding most of the Middle East. So what they can prove is that the entire Western Hemisphere and at least most of the Middle East was underwater at one point, as well as other areas too. What they can't prove is that it was all at exactly the same time. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that they can't prove it. And I guess I would say it this way: they can't prove it yet, because what you're going to find out as we go through this broadcast is that many things that they once claimed didn't exist or couldn't be proven have now been demonstrated to be, in fact, true facts. So let's get into the Exodus. For a long time, the Exodus was disputed because archaeologists hadn't found any evidence of its existence. And again, absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence, but they couldn't find any relics or artifacts that would have dated from the time or from the pilgrimage through the desert for 40 years. And their reasoning was, they said, such a large movement of people couldn't have happened without leaving behind discarded items, evidences of fires for heating or cooking, bones of dead people and animals, parts of shelters constructed, and so on. They declared, since they didn't find these, that the Exodus didn't in fact occur. Further, there was a claim made that Moses couldn't have written the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Bible, because writing hadn't been invented, and Moses couldn't have known how to write. Well, first of all, that we're going to talk about the writing thing in a second, but literally, most of the archaeologists, for most of the time that they were looking in the wrong place. And for those of you on the audio podcast, I apologize for the visual here, but it's useful and I think important. If you want to catch this, we're just a couple minutes into the program. You won't have to go far. Video will be on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. So here is a map that you can look at. And the place where the Egyptians had the Israelites held captive was in a place called Pi Ramses. Pi Ramses was the city of Ramses, and this is where a lot of the great building projects occurred. And we also find there evidence of a couple things. One thing that is found there is the lower layers of some of the buildings were constructed out of bricks made with mud and straw. And as you go further up the building, you find that there's less straw, and then at the top of the buildings there's no straw in the bricks. And we know the story that Pharaoh told him that he was providing them straw, and then he said, you'll have to find the straw on your own, and they were pulling up stubble of any plants they could find to make straw, and eventually they abandoned using straw to make the bricks. We find exactly that in the city of Pi Ramses. So Pi Ramses is where the Israelites were held in captivity. We also find records in the Egyptian records of the idea that Israelites were held in captivity there. So, but I want to show you here, Pi Ramses is in the upper left of the map. If you know where the Sinai Peninsula is in Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula is kind of a tongue of land that hangs down and juts into the Red Sea. Bordered on one side, on the west, by the Suez Gulf, and on the east by the Gulf of Aqaba. And so you can see on the map the Sinai Peninsula is down there, and that is actually named after Mount Sinai. And so it was assumed to be the biblical Mount Sinai that's down there. Now, this Mount Sinai that we currently call Mount Sinai was declared to be Mount Sinai by Constantine in 326 AD, and the peninsula then was named after that. Well, Mount Sinai in the Bible was said to be in Midian, and Midian was now realized to be in Arabia, not in the Sinai Peninsula. And so once archaeologists realized that Midian and Mount Sinai weren't where they considered them to be, they began trying to sort out where Midian really was, and consequently, of course, where Mount Sinai was. And it's now recognized that what is Mount Horeb in Midian is now located in modern-day Saudi Arabia, and Mount Horeb there is the only mountain that could be the Mount Sinai in the Bible. And so you can see where Pi Ramses is located, where Mount Sinai is today, where the Red Sea is located, and the two gulfs off of the Red Sea. And there's a dotted line on the map here that is the what was believed to be the traditional path of the Israelites out of Egypt to Mount Sinai. And where the exact crossing of the Gulf of Suez was something no one knew. And so there was speculation it was northern or southern. Either way, in searching these routes, either northern or southern, they hadn't found anything. And you see the green line here, which is a straight line between Pi Ramses and Mount Horeb, also crossing the Red Sea at the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, that straight line, of course, wasn't a straight line. We know that the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, and so there wouldn't have been a straight line to be drawn. It's just a straight line showing the locations here. But prior to the time of Constantine, there was a long Jewish and Christian tradition of making pilgrimage to Mount Horeb in Midian over here in Saudi Arabia. And this is attested to in the writings of Josephus. It's in the Septuagint. Philo, Origen, Eusebius, and Jerome all attested to the idea that Christians and Jews made pilgrimage to Mount Horeb in Saudi Arabia. There's no evidence of Christian or Jewish pilgrimage to the modern name Mount Sinai, as the name is given today in the Sinai Peninsula, at least not prior to 326 AD, when Constantine declared it to be the holy site. Now, why is this important? It's important because the main claims of Judaism and Christianity are based in many ways on events described in the biblical Exodus. If the Exodus didn't occur, it creates real problems for both Judaism and Christianity. So at Sinai, Moses first prophesied the coming of the Christ. He said, "And the Lord said unto me, I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee," being Moses, right? "And I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I command him." That's Deuteronomy 18, 15 to 22. In turn, Christ staked his authority and credibility on the teachings from Exodus. Jesus said, "Think not that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy but fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle shall be in no wise passed from the law till all be fulfilled." And of course, the law was that given to Moses. And so Moses looks to Jesus, Jesus looks to Moses, and both look to events of the Exodus. So once archaeologists began looking at Mount Horeb, the discoveries began to come fast and furious. So I want to just list some of these for you. First is, and we're going to talk at quite a bit of length about this, alphabetic inscriptions at the site date to the time of Exodus, and their content, the content of the inscriptions refers to events described in Exodus 17. There are footprints traced on the ground that have been found, and apparently in mud or something that have been preserved, that with an alphabetic caption that says, "Wherever the soles of your feet shall tread shall be your territory." That's as in Deuteronomy 11:24 and Joshua 1:3. The split rock of Horeb, Exodus 17:6, is found at the presumed site of Rephidim near Sinai, near Mount Horeb. There's an altar to cattle worship, as in the golden calf, that's found at the Midian site. There's an altar for burnt offerings to Yahweh that is there. It's found at the base of the mountain. And alongside that altar are remains of marble columns, 12 of them, as though to the 12 tribes of Israel, as in Exodus 24:4. There's a cave just below a cleft in the rock at the peak that's found there. The cave of Elijah is what people consider that to be. 1 Kings 19:8-9. So once they went to Mount Horeb, all of these things were readily observable. None of them were observable when they went to the traditional site of Mount Sinai in Egypt, the one declared by Constantine to be Mount Sinai. Now, the writing of God on the tablets appears to have been in the original alphabet. And so this is going to be a little bit detailed here, and I hope it's not too much detail, but I think it's important. The inscriptions that are found on some of the tablets there and some of the rocks and in the ground there are brief, but they're telling. They are written in the oldest alphabet of letters known to historical science, an alphabet called Thamudic. They date to the 15th century BC, which is the time of the Exodus, according to the experts at the Saudi Ministry of Antiquities. As different as these alphabets and letters look from those that we have today, There appears to have been one original alphabet that all of the subsequent alphabets come from. And this appears to be the ancient Thamudic writings, the very language of the writings found at Mount Horeb. So it's agreed that the oldest alphabet is Thamudic, and that's the language that these are written in. Now, that Thamudic was the oldest alphabet was a controversial conclusion that was drawn by a guy named Hubert Grimm. He was a renowned Hebrew scholar and a historic linguist, and he went to the Middle East to study the earliest alphabetic inscriptions. And Grimm stated that ancient Thamudic script was the original alphabet of letters. He said that in 1896, and he later said that it was the writing of the Israelites in Exodus in 1923. Here's what Grimm said. He said the determination that around 1500 BC, Hebrew was spoken and even written on the Sinai Peninsula revolutionizes completely the present view of the history of the Hebrew language. Neither the Egyptian hieroglyphs nor the cuneiform writing would have been suitable for the written version in this language. Only a writing system based on alphabetic characters, namely the Semitic script, could have been considered for the written version. And there's no doubt that the authors of the Bible kept in mind this Semitic writing system as the original form of the tablets of the law. That was Hubert Grimm, a Hebrew and historic linguist in 1923. Now, Grimm received a little bit of support from scholars, but he was mostly all alone in this opinion until 1936, when archaeologist Stephen Kyger came to the same conclusion from sources that were totally independent of Grimm. Here's what Kyger says. In light of recent research, far from questioning the ability of Moses to write, we may even conjecture that he had progressed beyond clumsy syllabic scripts to an alphabetical style of writing not dissimilar from the Hebrew of a later age. He said that in 1936. Now, although Kyger had misidentified Thamudic script as something he called Manaean, today it's well accepted that the ancient Thamudic is the oldest alphabet of letters and the precursor of Manaean and Sabaean, dated by many epigraphicers as early 15th century BC. This is a clear statement of this effect can be found on the joint website of the Smithsonian and the Saudi Ministry of Antiquities and Museums, along with many examples of Thamudic inscriptions. So these are secular sources. The Smithsonian and the Saudi Ministry of Antiquities both agree that Thamudic, the very language found at Mount Horeb, was the earliest alphabet of letters. More recently, another expert in the development of the alphabet, a guy named Leonard Schlein, in 1998 theorized that the transforming event of Sinai was the invention of the alphabet. And here's what he says. It's not a mere coincidence that the first book written in an alphabet is the Old Testament. There's none earlier. Previously, Akhenaten and Hammurabi each took tentative steps toward introducing monotheism and the law to their people. These abstract concepts initially failed to take hold because both monarchs ruled over barely literate societies. The mystery of why not one, but both of these incredible ideas should appear shimmering together in a mirage in the middle of a desert to a group of escaped slaves teetering on the edge of survival, far from the centers of learning, is one of the great puzzles of all time. Perhaps the transforming event that transpired long ago at the foot of Mount Sinai was the invention of the alphabet. Yet another expert, Robert Logan, concurs. He says the occurrence of monotheism, codified law, and the alphabet all at the same moment in history cannot have been coincidental. The abstractness of all three innovations were mutually reinforcing. As Schlein puts it, quote, a monotheistic God is not tied to a concrete image. A monotheistic God that is not tied to a concrete image is a highly abstract concept. Abstraction is a crucial component of logical reasoning, and its use can set people free from superstition. So, James Cameron, who you may know from Titanic and other movies, as the producer of those movies, James Cameron, in his film Exodus Decoded in 2006, which was researched and presented by Simcha Jacobovici, He concludes that the Hebrews did not write in hieroglyphs, but in an early alphabet. Of late, the prominent archaeologist David Roll in 2009 postulates this. Here's what David Roll says, quote, "The Ten Commandments were carved in the world's most ancient alphabet. Anyone who studies early writing with an open mind eventually comes to the inevitable reality that the earliest alphabet appeared at the same time and place as the earliest body of literature written in alphabetic writing, the Old Testament. The conclusion of all these prominent researchers, both past and present, is impressive support indeed, yet none of these experts was aware of the inscriptional evidence from the Sinai site in Midian." So, in other words, outside of the Sinai site in Midian, all of these researchers have come to the same conclusion, that the earliest alphabet was written by the Hebrews in the Old Testament at that time. Later, once the Sinai site in Egypt began to be researched, what they found was the same alphabet there. So the evidence for the Exodus and for the biblical story of the law being given on Mount Sinai is, not only physical evidence, but it's reinforced by the manuscript evidence and by the people who study such things. All right, next thing we're going to talk about, the plagues of Egypt. If the Exodus happened, did the plagues of Egypt that caused Pharaoh to let them go happen? Well, the plagues of Egypt comprised 10 calamities, right, inflicted upon the Egyptians by God. The idea was it was going to compel Pharaoh to let the enslaved Israelites go. Some historians argue that these events just are an exaggeration, but now archaeological evidence has confirmed that these events likely did occur. Again, believed to affect the city of Ramses, which is in the Nile Delta, and which served as the capital of Egypt during the reign of Ramses II. The archaeological evidence explains and helps corroborate the natural explanations for the disasters. So whether you believe it was God or not, let's talk about what they were able to find from the archaeological evidence. Rising temperatures or a drought naturally changes the color of the Nile, this affecting the spread of bacteria and red algae. The change triggered a blight, forcing frog populations to abandon the river onto land before dying. So the plague of frogs was caused by a blight in the river, and the frogs jumped onto land, and so there was a plague of frogs everywhere. The death of all the frogs, which happened, of course, because frogs can't survive outside of water for any length of time. The death of all the frogs brought a plague of insects, a dramatic increase in insects, because there were no frogs to eat the insects. The insects, of course, brought disease infecting livestock. And so, there's some of the plagues right there. The thunderstorm of fire, right? God sent fiery hail from heaven. Thunderstorm of fire wouldn't be related to those events, right? But appears to be at the same time that the eruption of Thera in 628 BC, which is a mountain there, volcanic mountain, one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history. There are ash deposits from that eruption found all over the Nile region. So apparently, the eruption of Thera is what was, dropping flaming rocks out of the sky, described as flaming hailstones. And of course, hail was the only form of rocks that people ever knew of coming from the sky. Parting the Red Sea, next idea here. Whether the Exodus occurred, of course, we know that it did now from the evidence we have. The parting of the Red Sea can be supported by natural science and alternative historical events. So there are two natural rationales for how the Red Sea was parted. And again, we're talking about the Gulf of Aqaba, much smaller body of water than the entire Red Sea, is the likely crossing, now that we know more, Mount Sinai was over in Midian. So winds more than 60 miles an hour in the coastal regions have been observed parting the waves, and consequently, the opening may have been temporarily created by atypically strong gusts, or the breath of God, as God, caused the water to part. Another historically and feasible theory revolves around the idea, and this may be related to the 10 plagues, around the eruption of Thera. As we know, volcanoes and mountains often create their own weather. This big eruption may have caused atypical weather patterns and oceanic patterns that changed the water levels, the ground levels, and the wind speeds in the area at the same time. Moving on, Edom. Bible says that Edom was an ancient kingdom neighboring the kingdom of Judah. The Edomites were defeated by King Saul before being subjugated by King David. The consensus was that the Edomites were a pastoral, a farming civilization, too small to assemble an army as described. However, discoveries at the Kirbat and Nahas archaeological site have concluded that the kingdom of Edom was one chiefly focused on copper mining. There were slag heaps have been found from copper mining, pottery, and even an Iron Age fortress dated to around the 10th century BC, exactly the right time, show the existence of a far more advanced and militarized civilization in Edom. Okay, King David. King David's a pretty prominent figure in the Old Testament, right? He slayed Goliath. He became the ruler of the kingdom of Israel. He was father of Solomon, and yet the historicity of King David was disputed. No one had found any direct evidence of his existence outside of the Bible, and so opinion had coalesced around the idea that he was an apocryphal figure, that he really didn't exist. That is until 1993. The Tel Dan stele, a broken slab bearing an inscription, was discovered by archaeologists in northern Israel, carrying the earliest known reference to the Judaic monarch. The city of Jerusalem was built around something called the Gihon Spring. Cities need a water source, and they're either usually on a river or around a lake or around a spring. Well, there's something called the Spring Citadel, a giant 18th century BC fortress that protected the city of Jerusalem from prospective invaders. In other words, the water would be kept in the city. If you wanted to lay siege to Jerusalem, you really couldn't because you ran out of water pretty quickly. The citadel, Spring Citadel, allowed access to the spring from only inside the city. According to the biblical narrative, has 7-meter thick walls that were overcome by the armies of David when he took his conquest of the city against the Jebusites. There was a 20-year expedition searching for evidence of the ancient fortification, and eventually they were able to identify it. Remnants of stacked 5-ton stones that were 6 meters thick, the largest walls ever discovered to date, were stemming from the pre-Herod area of the region. The archaeological find is situated right around the city's water source. Gath, take a look at, here's another picture for those of you on the video. Gath, hometown of Goliath. Archaeological excavations have corroborated the existence, culture, and eventually destruction of the ancient Philistine civilization. Gradually conquered by the Israelites, the greatest and last to fall was the city of Gath, the hometown of Goliath. It was believed to be a myth, apocryphal. During the late 19th century, archaeologists finally identified the lost city. Edward Robinson, archaeologist, found excavations of the ancient Philistine town, offered corroboration for parts of the biblical narrative, including among the findings is a 3,000-year-old horned stone altar bearing striking similarities to the ones described in the book of Kings and Exodus. Furthermore, there's the remains of an enormous structure with 2 supporting pillars, akin to those detailed in the story of Samson, were discovered there. And perhaps most importantly, the excavations revealed evidence of a large-scale siege and subsequent destruction of the ancient city around the late 9th century BC, in line with the biblical assertion of its capture by Hazael of Aram. Solomon's walls. Here is a picture again for those of you on the video of Solomon's walls. According to the first book of Kings, Solomon, the son of David, king of Judah, at some time after marrying the Egyptian pharaoh's daughter of the Egyptian pharaoh, ordered the construction of a great wall around the ancient city of Jerusalem. The historical census was that the wall didn't exist, that it was merely a story, and then modern archaeological excavations led by Elliot Mazar proved otherwise. Measuring approximately 70 meters in length and 6 meters high, these ancient remains situate the wall's location precisely around the best estimates of the city of Jerusalem during the time. They include a gatehouse and tower. The purpose of the structure was one for military defense is not disputed. Helping to date the remains of the wall, there are remnants of pottery from the late 10th century BC, the reign of Solomon. They help to confirm the contextuality of the structure. It does provide the first evidence of Solomon's great building works, and the discovery of the wall has renewed speculation regarding other projects attributed to Solomon, including the first temple. Jezebel, the most wicked woman in the Bible, right? The daughter of the Phoenician ruler Ithabal I. Jezebel, according to the book of Kings, married Ahab, the king of Israel, and she encouraged her new husband to abandon his religious convictions in favor of her own multi-god polytheistic worship of Baal and Asherah. In addition to converting his nation at large, Jezebel allegedly ordered a campaign of religious persecution. The truth of the story was disputed, questioned, until 1964, when an ancient seal from the 9th century BC, again, exactly the right time, was discovered in an antiquities market bearing the partial inscription YZBL, which is the Hebrew word for Jezebel at that time. The intricacy of the seal strongly suggests that whoever's name was inscribed on it was in fact royalty. Isaiah is an 8th century BC prophet. Of course, he was a disputed figure. There was no corroborating evidence outside the Bible in any alternative historical sources. Nobody had talked about him. There was no evidence found. So people many had concluded, many of the secular historians had concluded that Isaiah didn't exist. However, in an archaeological excavation in Jerusalem, a small clay seal dating to the 8th century BC was discovered. Again, exactly the right time. The ancient artifact is inscribed with the name Isaiah in Hebrew, and it's followed by the ancient Hebrew word for prophet. So the conclusion we can make from this is at least that an individual who was in a position of religious significance named Isaiah did exist around that time. The walls of Nehemiah. Following the conquest of the kingdom of Judah by Babylon in 598 BC, the Jews were forced into exile until they were given permission to return to Jerusalem by the Persian ruler Cyrus the Great. Upon their return to Jerusalem, Nehemiah bemoaned that the walls had been broken down and its gates had been destroyed by fire. He ordered the people to rebuild the walls so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. The building works were completed in just 52 days, whereafter they said, when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid. The archaeological remains of Jerusalem have long been held as a litmus test for biblical accuracy. Whether, if you can't find it there, then it must not be true. There was no evidence of the walls being found. That is until Elliot Mazar again and her team, who they were excavating a stone tower. They unintentionally weakened its foundations. And in trying to repair it, they discovered a 5-meter wide wall, and it was accompanied by pottery dating from the 6th and 5th centuries BC, again, the exact right time, including biblical names concurrent with the timing of the story. This discovery single-handedly affirmed the core narrative of an entire section of the Bible. Now, those are Old Testament proofs. Now, let's move on to some New Testament stuff. Nazareth. Nazareth is where Jesus grew up, right? The existence of the city of Nazareth at the time that Jesus grew up was not an accepted fact. Although there's Nazareth today, located in the northern district of modern-day Israel, it may not have been in the exact same place, the one that's there today, and there was a doubt about whether the concurrent survival of Nazareth during the years of biblical relevance existed. Historians believe that at some point around 720 BC, Nazareth was destroyed by the Assyrians. However, recently, Israeli archaeologists, easy for me to say, Israeli archaeologists recently successfully excavated remains at the presumed location of Nazareth, dating from the early Roman period at the time of Jesus' birth. Next thing we've got here for a picture, This is the James ossuary. An ossuary is a box for bones, a bone box, if you will. And you can think of it as a coffin. You know, back in ancient times, people were just buried in the ground. It was expensive to build a box to put people's bones in and to set them aside, and it would only happen for people that were revered and important. James the Just was an early leader of the Jerusalem church in the apostolic times. He died in martyrdom approximately 69 AD, and he's remained the focus of sustained speculation regarding his relationship with Jesus. Now, some people in some churches don't believe that Jesus had any brothers. I'm not here to argue that. I'm here to say that it's described in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. James is described in those Gospels as the brother of Jesus who is called Christ. Jesus also has other siblings that are described, and some doctrines, the Catholic Church teaches that Mary remained a perpetual virgin and thus didn't have any other children than Jesus. Now, that argument I don't want to make right now one way or the other. If that's what you believe, that's just fine with me. But the discovery of the James ossuary matters. This was unearthed in the southeast of the Temple Mount in the Kidron Valley region. The James ossuary is a limestone box that once housed the bones of somebody that was highly respected. Dates from the 1st century, and it bears the inscription, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Now, the authenticity of the inscription is in doubt. The authenticity of the box is not in doubt. And so people have challenged it. What's interesting is that the state of Israel that owns it and has it in their antiquities department has refused any independent inspection of the relic. And so it's left historical opinion divided as to whether that inscription was added later, whether it was there to begin with. And of course, even if it was there to begin with, people can argue about what it means. The Pool of Siloam, one of the many miracles described in the book of John, the disciple tells the story of Jesus restoring the sight of a blind man at the Pool of Siloam. You put clay on the man's eyes, right? And after washing it off, the man finds his vision returned to him. Now, they knew that the Pool of Siloam existed during the reign of Hezekiah, which is, 866 to 715 BC. It was believed by historians that the ancient reservoir system had been destroyed under the Assyrian ruler Sennacherib when he invaded there. There were claims made by people who were, faithful to the Bible that, well, even if Sennacherib destroyed it, it must have been rebuilt. And of course, historians rejected that and thought people were just trying to make an argument for their biblical position. However, during repairs on a damaged sewer line, and here's a photo for those of you on the video. During repairs on a damaged sewer line in Jerusalem, a team of workmen inadvertently stumbled upon an amazing discovery: 2 steps leading to the remains of a pool measuring almost 70 meters in length. Buried within plaster foundations of the stone facade, they found some coins. The coins bared the face of Alexander Jannaeus, who was the ruler of Jerusalem from 103 to 76 BC. They found pottery shards corroborating the timeline, and it's been determined that this successor pool was created less than 100 years prior to the birth of Jesus and was likely still in use throughout his lifetime. The existence of Jesus. So the existence of Jesus, if not his divinity, can be confirmed by concurrent non-historical sources. Non-Christian sources viewed as more impartial than Christian writings serve to provide independent certification of at least the core elements of the biblical narrative. Many of the most important moments, including Josephus's recollection of Jesus serving as a priest, Tacitus makes an account of Jesus dying by crucifixion under order of Pontius Pilate. These are Roman writings that provide independent, outside of the Bible, agreement that Jesus existed. Today, the question of whether Jesus really was a real man, who really was a priest, really was executed by crucifixion, is now a settled question. Attention now focuses more on details concerning his life and his claims of divinity. Caiaphas, Joseph Caiaphas, commonly known by just his last name as Caiaphas, was the Jewish high priest who was responsible for the plot to kill Jesus. Beyond the Bible, there are very few historical references, but there are a few Josephus, again, is the main legitimate written source. He claims that Caiaphas was appointed as a member of the royal priesthood or the high priesthood by the Roman prefect Valerius in 18 BC. This conclusion was uncertain. Josephus was the only source outside the Bible, and so they like to have more than one source for things, right? There was the accidental discovery of the Caiaphas ossuary in the Peace Forest in Jerusalem in 1990. A tomb's roof was unintentionally opened by a bulldozer during construction. The discovered necropolis is a place where they stored the dead, right? Bore similarities to other Second Temple period building sites in Jerusalem. So it's the same in construction as things built at the time. Contained within were 12 ossuaries, including 2 bearing the name Caiaphas, one of which was highly inscribed in a highly ornate fashion and said, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. It held the remains of a 60-year-old male dating from the 1st century, and the find validates that at least such an individual did exist around the time of Jesus and was of high status based on the inscriptions on the box, the style of the box, and the fact that there was a box at all means that he was important. Herod I, also known as Herod the Great, reigned as the Roman client king of Judea and acts as the key antagonist in the New Testament to the life of Jesus. He was a controversial ruler. Herod did unquestionably exist, and he's documented by lots of Roman sources, and was possessed of murderous proclivities. He was responsible for killing his wife, his brother-in-law, 3 of his sons, and hundreds of others. Matthew's depiction of Herod as cruel and authoritarian is not without merit. That is who he was. He died in around 4 BC, estimated to be right around when Jesus was born. Herod was buried in a giant mausoleum, complete with a pool more than twice the size of an Olympic swimming pool. 2 more, and then we'll get to some questions from the Facebook page. Pontius Pilate. He was the 5th prefect of the Roman province of Judea under Tiberius, and the fact that he exists is upheld by a number of independent historical sources, among them something called the Pilate Stone. Discovered in 1961, the Pilate Stone is a limestone block bearing a Latin inscription. It was situated behind the stage house of the Roman theater at Caesarea, which was the administrative center of the governors of Judea. Detailing that Pilate was indeed prefect of Judea, this find offers support to his overall role in Jesus's involvement with the authorities. In addition to the Pilate Stone, the Roman official was recorded by several contemporary historical writers, including Tacitus, Philo, and Josephus, and they highlight his harsh suppression of religious dissent and his eventual removal in and around 37 AD for his oppressive tactics. Judas Iscariot, who is one of the most important figures in the Christian canon. The existence of Judas Iscariot wasn't widely accepted by the historical community for many years. They relied instead on logical argumentation and instead of earthly discoveries. We don't have any physical evidence of Judas existing, but even atheist Bart Ehrman, who's a prominent atheist, contends that Judas's betrayal is, quote, about as historically certain as anything else in the tradition. The inclusion of an apostle, that's a close quote, the inclusion of an apostle turning on Jesus would not have been made up because of its negative implications for Jesus. In a hero story, you don't have a hero a guy who overcomes the hero. So as a result, the prevailing historical opinion now has concluded that Judas was in fact the man who handed over Jesus to the Jerusalem authorities in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, some questions from the Facebook page I want to get to. Jeff wants to know, does the Bible speak of World War III? And do I believe this is the beginning? I think I may have answered this in the last one, but regardless, one more time is fine. I don't believe that the Bible speaks of World War III. I don't. I do believe that this might be the beginning of World War III. What Jeff means is this action in Ukraine. David, another viewer or Facebook page question asks two questions. The first he asks is if the story of the Good Samaritan means that everyone in the world is your neighbor, even people you haven't met. Well, I'd say yes, it does. Galatians 6 verses 9 and 10 say, "And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith." So we are to do good to all. The story of the Good Samaritan is to illustrate that literally everybody is our neighbor and we are supposed to do good to everyone. David also asks, his second question is if we should abandon all borders because they are man-made and the whole world is the kingdom of the Christ. I don't think so. God definitely believes in nations and borders. We know this because he made Israel a nation and established its borders. And so God believes in nations and borders, and so should we. Daryl, good friend Daryl here on the Facebook page wants to know, what about the end times and all of the signs of the end coming together? Well, I'll just say this. I don't see the end times the way modern prophecy teachers do see it. As near as I can tell, Jesus comes back on the last day, and that's the day after which there are no more days. So Jesus himself said in Matthew 24, 35 to 37, he said, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." In Mark, the parallel passage in Mark, verse 13 or chapter 13, verses 31 to 33 say, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is." And so I don't want to pretend to know what Jesus said. Not only can't we know, but that he didn't even know as the Son, that the angels don't know. And so when preachers tell you that they know, I would say that you should probably be very skeptical of their claims. So that is the end of episode 3. Stay tuned for episode 4, not coming too distant future. Episode 4 will be a continuation of this same topic. Can we trust the Bible? Focusing on the tension or supposed conflicts between science, which of course was created by God, and the evidence that science claims that the Bible can't be true. And we'll focus on that and demonstrate to you that those differences are, if there are any at all, that they are unimportant and have no impact whatsoever on whether or not the Bible can in fact be trusted. So thanks again for your time and attention. I hope that you found this valuable to you. And this again is the Footlight Broadcast. Please catch up with us on the Facebook page. Please like the page. That does help the show grow. You can get the audio podcast wherever you get audio. And also we are on YouTube and Rumble and at www.thefootlight.com. Thanks again. My name is Brian O'Kelly, and I will see you next time.